Good morning, Bitcoiners, and welcome back to your economic calendar, the news and analysis you need to start the week off right in Bitcoin. I'm Mauricio Di Bartolomeo, co-founder and chief strategy officer here at Ledn, and today is Tuesday, June 21st, and we have a great episode for you today. As always, in today's issue, we're going to talk about the recent volatility that we've been seeing, not just in Bitcoin, but in markets in general. And we're also going to talk about over 100,000 Bitcoin notional that are expiring in option contracts this week. And we're going to talk about the impact that may have on markets. We're also going to talk about Fed speeches. In fact, after the recent announcement from last week where they raised interest rates by 75 base points, this week they have a large part of the Fed roster out doing speeches throughout the week, including Jerome Powell, James Bullard, and others. We're going to talk about what we can expect and when those speeches are scheduled for throughout the week. So grab your coffees. It's going to be a great one. And starting as we usually do with Bitcoin, we see here that after dropping 11.19% on the week of June 6th, last week we saw a drop of 22.6% in Bitcoin on the weekly candle, and that reached a low point of essentially in the mid 1700s last week. We see that so far this week, we seem to have been holding some ground. Right now, we are up 4.95% for the week, trading at around $21,570 at the moment. It will be a big week for Bitcoin this week as over 100,000 Bitcoins worth of option contracts are expiring this week. For that, we're going to pop up here our skew dashboard to show you basically how those option contracts are shaping up for this week expiration, as well as some of the future expirations, because there's some interesting points here to see. So right here, what you have is the distribution of all open option contracts for Bitcoin in the months to come. And as you can see, the big outlier here is this 116,900 Bitcoins worth of options that are expiring in just 3 days on Friday the 24th. Now, as you can see, not as you can see, given the recent price moves, before we get into the future expirations, given the recent price moves, as we see in the last 2 weeks, we've seen moves of 11% and 22%. This means that a lot of these option contracts that were entered into months ago are going to be deeply in or out of the money, which means in English, or in other words, that there's going to be some very large payouts from some buyers to some sellers and vice versa, given that these contracts, many of them were likely put in place months ago, and there's been some really big moves as of recently. Now, not surprisingly, as you can see from the screen, open interest in options, which means open option contracts beyond the June expiration contract, are pretty anemic in terms of volume. There's very much nothing there. In fact, the June expiration right now has more open interest than the monthly expirations for July and September combined. This is not something that we see typically, and I think it's a reflection of the impact that the recent moves have had in potential volumes or trading volumes in general. Now, again, this is probably a foretelling sign of potentially low trading volumes to come in the months ahead, or in the few months ahead, as we can see here from this chart. Now, looking beyond the options curve or the option structure and more into the futures contracts curves, we see here that the curves are actually showing some pretty wonky shapes, as you can see. So this is the annualized basis of the futures contracts for Bitcoin. And as you know, typically these lines are sloping up and to the right. But as you can see here, some curves are displaying really irregular shapes. In particular, let's just pop up the Deribit one, which again, this is showing quite a wonky shape relative to what we're typically used to seeing. And what this, I guess, tells us is that, or what we can see from the chart, is that most curves are in fact either backwarded or flat. Backwarded would be like this one from CoinFlex, where you can tell that the price, essentially the implied premium, is dropping as the months go further ahead. And in the case of the CME, we see that essentially it's got this really, really wonky shape. And when we go out to Deribit and the others, again, we just continue to see these odd formations, which again are not necessarily what we typically see in the futures curves when they're sloping upwards and to the right when they are all in contango. Now, what does this mean? It means that there's a lot of volatility and uncertainty around the future prices of Bitcoin as per what we can see in the futures contracts. Now, outside of options, outside of futures, the news flow that is coming through for Bitcoin has still been somewhat unfavorable as of recently. Many anti-Bitcoin critics have been having their victory laps on Twitter, and not to be left out of the conversation, ProShares, the operator for several ETFs, just announced yesterday that it is launching a futures-based contract or a futures contract-based short Bitcoin ETF this week. That's the news you have on your screen right now. Now, while the timing of this announcement is certainly interesting, it is not the first short ETF for Bitcoin in existence. Horizons, another operator, has a short ETF or short Bitcoin ETF that currently is live in Canada. Now, the potential impact for this short ETF fund on markets and on Bitcoin prices will likely be limited. However, it does feed this news, this headline does feed this short Bitcoin narrative on the mainstream. Now, again, moving away from some of the Bitcoin commentary and back into some of the general market commentary, the Fed is likely to continue clobbering markets lower with interest rates. And it will be hard for Bitcoin not to get caught in that crossfire of selling pressure that is going to be essentially Fed-induced. Now, however, we always like to remind our readers that Bitcoin is much more than just price. Here's a chart that we wanted to highlight for you as we wrap up the Bitcoin section this week. This chart on your screen shows the number of addresses with balances over 0.01 and 0.001 Bitcoins. And the red line is 0.01, the green line is 0.001 Bitcoins. The image speaks for itself, but here just to highlight, even in the context of a massively dropping price in Bitcoin, we are seeing right now, as we can see from the network, that the number of addresses with balances above 0.01 and 0.001 on the chain have been increasing dramatically, even as the price has been decreasing dramatically. So it seems, as per the lines, that people are continuing to find value and utility in Bitcoin, and that utility seems to be increasing at the same time as the price is decreasing. So something just to keep in mind, because regardless of price, Bitcoin continues solving problems for millions of people in places like Venezuela, where I'm from, Nigeria, Afghanistan, Ukraine, China, and many more countries. And it continues to solve these problems block after block. And as always, we wrap up this episode with a short summary of what's ahead for the week. As we mentioned at the start, there will be a lot of Fed speakers on cue for the week. And this could impact markets as they discuss the Fed's potential next move. The St. Louis Fed President, James Bullard, is one of the most hawkish Fed presidents on the board of the Fed. And he's scheduled to make a speech this week. We'll get into the details, but he's scheduled to make a speech later in the week. Jerome Powell, the chairman of the Fed, is also scheduled to speak twice during this week. And with so much riding on the Fed's decisions around interest rates, their words could very well move markets. So it's important to keep an eye on when these speeches will be coming out and what is said, I guess, in these speeches, and we'll list out the specific times and days for each one. On the Bitcoin front, as we mentioned, there's a very large expiration date on Friday for 116,000 and change Bitcoin. With the big moves that we've seen recently, again, a lot of these contracts may have some market makers that are deeply in or out of the money, which means just very big payouts moving around on settlement day, come Friday at settlement time, which means that some market makers or market participants could very well be deeply in or out of the money, and they might be inclined to essentially adjust their positions, which may add to volatility throughout the week, especially as we approach Friday. Keep in mind, despite of all of the things that we've covered, that we have an active conflict, a land war in Europe, which could always reintroduce even more unexpected volatility. And this could go both up or down. In the case of good news, it would be favorable. In the case of bad news, it would send us lower. Now, again, lots to keep in mind for the week ahead. We hope you enjoyed reading and as always, or enjoyed watching. And as always, we wrap up with a summary of the Fed speeches that could potentially move markets. And these would be today at 12 p.m. noon, Loretta Mester, the Cleveland Fed, gives a speech. At 2 p.m. today, Tom Barkin, Richmond Fed president, gives a speech. On Wednesday, tomorrow, we get a speech from the chairman of the Fed, Jerome Powell, at 9:30 a.m. Eastern. And then we get the Chicago Fed president, Charles Evans, at 12:50. Thursday gets us, once again, Jerome Powell at 10 a.m. And on Friday, we get James Bullard, the most hawkish member of the Fed, and Mary Daly at 4 p.m. So James Bullard's at 7:30 a.m., 4 p.m. is Mary Daly. And with that, we wrap up today's episode. Remind you once again, if you don't yet have a Ledn account, I welcome you to check out ledn.io and learn how you can start earning the best interest rates for your favorite assets, Bitcoin and USDC. We also have the best rates for dollar loans backed by Bitcoin if you need liquidity and don't want to sell your stack. And our most recent product, the Bitcoin Mortgage, lets you buy a house as big as your stack. So thank you everybody for watching, following, reading. If you enjoyed this show, if you learned something, if you laughed, I welcome you to like it, thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, share with your friends, and see you once again next week. Thanks everybody.